In a groundbreaking move to stop illegal ivory trade and protect Nigeria's elephants, the federal government recently destroyed 2.5 tons of seized elephant tusks and ivory. Peter Knight, founder of Wild Africa Fund, sheds light on this important action.
Well, I think the first thing people need to understand is that ivory cannot be sold. It's illegal everywhere in the world to export or sell ivory. So they can't sell the ivory. So you either keep it in a safe house and a room and have security 24/7 forever, which obviously is an expense to the government and the taxpayer, or you get rid of it somehow, you put it beyond use. And so in putting it beyond use, they're saving money in the long run, they're making sure that nobody can steal that stockpile, but they're also trying to raise public awareness. And so there's been more than a dozen newspaper, TV articles about it, and it gives the government a chance to say ivory is illegal. If you are trading in it, we will catch you, we will prosecute you, and we will destroy it. So they're using it as a public awareness tool, I think, to indicate increased effort from the government of Nigeria in trying to stop illegal ivory trafficking. The obviously biggest deterrent is people that do it get caught, so that means good detection. And you know, customs, I think, in Nigeria have been doing a pretty good job the last few years. There's been a lot of big seizures, so the risk of getting caught now in Nigeria is much higher. The second thing is prosecution. So you need to, when people are prosecuted, a few years ago, people were just, the ivory was being seized, but nothing was being done. Now, the customs are pursuing criminals, you know, and they are taking them, they're prosecuting them, and the courts are doing much better sentences. So, you know, if there's a risk of going to jail for 10, 15 years, that's obviously much more of a deterrent. We have one piece of the jigsaw I think is still missing here in Nigeria. The laws are very old, as you know, very old-fashioned, and there was, in the last administration, there was a bill introduced to modernize those laws. And we're very hopeful this will be reintroduced now with the new government and passed through this year. That law, as it was then, enables the government to pursue people across borders. You know, they can extradite people. And obviously, a lot of the criminals involved are not Nigerian. They're people coming using Nigeria as a transit point. So this new law, it gives more powers to seize equipment used in the smuggling. So you can take your car, you know, your property, if you've been using it for smuggling. So this new law would be a big, big deterrent. And really, if it can be passed, it would take Nigeria, you know, from being one of the biggest problem countries to actually heading up the efforts in West Africa to stop wildlife crime. One thing, one of my personal dreams, and I hope for Nigeria, is to actually rebuild some of the national parks here. So elephants now, there's only 400 left, as you know, but imagine if tourists could come and see elephants within Nigeria. There's been a recent study, 4 out of 5 tourists coming to Africa come to see wildlife. So if you don't have wildlife that people can see, you're losing 80% of the market. And I think the long-term plan for the government should be to refurbish, restructure some of the national parks so that the animal populations are growing, so that the animals are not afraid of people because they're not being poached, they're not being hunted, and to have tourism as a major thing. And you know, we recently spent time in Rwanda, and there in Akagera National Park, they have brought back rhinos, they have brought back elephants, they have brought back lions, so it's now a big 5 park, and so that's great for international tourism. And I think that should be the goal here in Nigeria. Not only would you bring in international tourists, but I think there are many Nigerians who would love to go and see elephants and lions and these animals if there were the opportunity. It's one thing having a forest. If the wildlife is gone, the absorption is less. So elephants, for example, forest elephants, they eat the small plants, they open up the areas to more light in to grow the bigger plants, which are the ones that absorb the carbon. So they've proven now that elephants are gardeners, if you like, of the forest, and that enables more carbon absorption. So where I think Africa really has a lot to offer, it is not the biggest emitters of carbon by any means, but as absorption in natural ecosystems, maybe Africa can lead the world. And with that should also come funding. We know about carbon offset funding. I think it's evolving now biodiversity offset funding. The elephants can enable more carbon absorption. They've also shown, for example, wildebeest. If there are wildebeest in a system in East Africa, the carbon absorption of those environments is greater. So they can be an asset on that side, as well as obviously the tourism. And you look at East Africa, the tourism, there have been calculations that an elephant in 75 years of its life generates more than $1 million for tourism. And that's jobs. So in the long term in Nigeria, I think that should be a goal, to develop wildlife as an asset for the tourism industry, as well as the national pride and the heritage and all those other elements that come with it. Pangolins consume ants. Ants consume and very often damage people's crops. So there's an element, an ecosystem service, if you like, from pangolins. And I think, most Nigerians don't primarily eat bushmeat, particularly here in the city. It's sort of a luxury add-on. It's not a staple. And most countries in the world have moved away. Everybody used to consume bushmeat all the time, have moved away to agricultural products. And I think, that's really where the long-term future of protein production is. It's maybe not a problem for things like grass cutter, which reproduce very quickly, the legal bushmeat, that's okay. But the animals like the pangolins, they will disappear very quickly under this pressure. So we're not going to have them in the future. So the option is not to carry on doing that. It will end, and it either ends with some pangolins left that can still fulfill their role in ecosystems, or it ends sooner. There's another big element here, which we've seen so much in the last few years, which is zoonotic disease. And now a lot of theories floated around COVID. The current thinking is quite clearly that it originated in the wild. It came from bats. Even the lab theory, people think the lab theory means that people developed it, made it in a lab. That's not true. The lab theory is people were studying wild bats in a lab, and it leaked from the wild bats through the lab. So even the lab theory is rooted back to the wild. But the prevailing theory now, and the information is, it came from that Wuhan market. And that was from originating in bats, jumping to something called a raccoon dog, which is a small mammal, which is, was used in the bushmeat trade. And then it spread through the butchering in that market, and the butchering process is what helped to spread it. So COVID-19 is only one of literally thousands of diseases that are out there in the wild, quite safe when they're in the wild, but if we bring them into our cities and we butcher the animals, there's a risk of transmission. And we've seen Lassa fever, we've seen Ebola, the list every year, Marburg, the list every year grows of these different diseases. So that's a good reason not to consume bushmeat. Our role, if you like, to us is exposing the challenges and promoting the solutions. So making people aware of the problems and what they are, and then looking around the African continent and finding programs that are working and giving them publicity too. So when we have seen some of these chicken projects, for example, with villages that work very well. So we need to promote those to make government and people aware that there are alternatives, there are better ways to do this, which are more sustainable, they're better from a health point of view, and that's really, and they're better from the income point of view, the scalability of it. So, these things are out there, we need to publicize them, and we need to encourage the governments and private sector to get behind some of these solutions. I think there's a lot of great things happening in Nigeria now. Primarily, we've just done our survey after working here for 2.5, 3 years, and 85% of people were aware of the campaign, and 30% of people said they would stop eating bushmeat going forward, illegal bushmeat going forward. And so that's a great start, and those are impressive numbers, and that's really been because of the participation of the Nigerian media. So that's been very encouraging. The government is moving in a number of directions positively. The big thing this year will be to get that legislation passed, and from that we kind of turn a circle from being on kind of a downward run to going upwards and improving. The African elephant populations have stabilized now with the Ivory ban, and with that, the dream for me is having one park in Nigeria where you have lions, where you have elephants, we have giraffe, and it's a lure for tourists and also a wonderful thing for Nigerians to be able to go and see their wildlife heritage.
And that's about it on this week's edition of Green Angle. Until I come your way next time, remember, together we can build a sustainable world. I am Esther Makwariola. Bye for now.